welcome to the About That podcast with me, your host, your favorite geek psychologist, your favorite pop culture enthusiast, your favorite queen of the nerds, Dr. Vanessa Hintz. And child, I had to come out of podcast hibernation to record this episode about it. Welcome to Derry, because let me just tell you something. I'm going to get right into it because that show was tight. Like, I wasn't ready at all. I was somewhat uninterested when I first heard about the show. I was not at all in a rush to watch it when it first premiered. And then I saw all this chatter online about how amazing it was. And then I watched the show. I tried to start watching the show. I couldn't. And it was just a lot. It was a lot, as we'll get into later on in the conversation. But I was able to sort of watch it all in, I think, a span of 2.5 days, maybe. And I'm so happy I did. I'm so happy I waited to watch it when all the episodes were released, because I have no patience. I have no chill. And I wouldn't have been able to sit for so long waiting to know what happened next. So I'm excited, as you all can very much tell. There have been a lot of things that have changed in my life since the last time I sat in front of this microphone to record an episode, to record a conversation, to record my thoughts, which we will talk about throughout this conversation, I'm sure. One of those major life changes is I became a mom for the first time. Welcome to beautiful baby girls, 2 twins. Absolutely amazing. One of the hardest and simultaneously most rewarding things of my entire life. And that monumental life transition has not only sort of given me just a new perspective on myself, my life, my priorities, all of those things. I think it also very much influenced the way that I received, interpreted, processed this show. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome to Derry aired on HBO/HBO Max between October 26th and December 14th of 2025. It is set in 1962 in the fictional town of Derry. I think Derry is fictional. I still to this day don't know. Somebody Google that and let me know. But I'm pretty sure Derry is not a real place. Maine, the state of Maine, absolutely is a real place. But the town of Derry, pretty sure it's fictional. As I mentioned, set in 1962. And really follows the entity known as Pennywise, its initial emergence, and really some of the earlier, and when I say earlier, I mean earlier than what we saw in the films, some of the earlier sort of shenanigans that Pennywise got up to, and let me tell you, it was a lot. And these events lead up to what we saw in the 2017 It Chapter 1 film, and subsequently It Chapter 2 in 2019. And so this prequel is focused on a number of things. One of those things being the arrival of the Hanlon family in Derry. And each member of that family, Father Leroy, who's in the military, Mother Charlotte, who is just a queen, and son Will, each of them sort of have their own engagement with not only Pennywise, the entity known as Pennywise, but also just the town of Derry itself and a lot of sinister shenanigans that are afoot. And so that, in a nutshell, is what the show is about, which I know is as clear as mud and tells you absolutely nothing unless you're super familiar with Stephen King's universe. What I will say, though, this is a prequel series, and it is set in the universe of those 2 films that I mentioned. And so Stephen King has a lot of books. Stephen King, there have been a lot of sort of on-screen adaptation of those books, whether that be TV, film, what have you. With It, we saw the first adaptation in I think it was 1990, the OG It made-for-TV movie with Tim Curry as Pennywise. This has nothing to do with that. So this prequel series, again, is sort of set in this new reimagining with Bill Skarsgård playing Pennywise. And he actually served as an executive producer on It, Welcome to Derry. And some of the articles that I read noted that he actually wasn't even trying to be involved in this at all. What I read indicated that he felt he was playing a whole slew of like really dark characters. And he was like, I'm not even trying to be doing all that with Pennywise. Let me just thank our lucky stars that he said yes, because as always, he was absolutely amazing. And I think without him, this would have been a whole hot mess. Last thing I'll say by way of just important notes about the series, this is It Welcome to Derry Chapter 1, which sort of alludes to the fact that there will be more prequel Welcome to Derry series. And I heard through the grapevine that they were actually planning to do a total of like 3 seasons of this, going sort of for earlier in time, which would be super dope, especially after the success of this season. I will also say that the bar was set super high. So please, please don't fumble the bag with this one. Overall, writ large, It Welcome to Derry was well received. If you look at the Rotten Tomatoes page, critics rated it about an 80% approval rating, 81% by audiences. And according to IMDb, the highest rated episodes were The Black Spot at a 9.4 and the season finale titled Winter Fire at a 9.3. Conversely, the lowest ranked episodes were episode 3, Now You See It, which still at a 7.6 is not actually that bad, and the second episode of the show, That Thing in the Dark, at a 7.7. And so, again, those are like the worst episodes. And for me, real talk, I'm gonna keep it 100 with y'all. No misses for me. I actually didn't have an episode that I didn't like. I feel like the show was absolutely beautifully done. And as we sort of get into this further analysis, as we get into take a sort of deeper critical look at the show, I want to preface it by saying #spoiler alert. Like, if that wasn't clear, please let it be clear now. Like, if you haven't watched the show, you should just stop listening right now. I don't think anything I said up until this point would ruin it for you. And, like, sorry, not sorry. So I'm going to be talking about some stuff. And maybe it's a spoiler. I don't know. But if you haven't seen it, you should, like, bookmark this for a later listen after you watch all the things. And so the first thing I want to sort of talk about are some of my favorite and least favorite moments from the show. Again, my favorites, there are far too many to count because, as I mentioned, I think that there were 5 stars. Absolutely would recommend, no notes. The show is absolutely amazing. I think one of the brightest spots for me was my guy Rich Santos. Rest in peace to my guy. Him, and I think the entirety of the young kids, the way that the actors sort of portrayed the kids, their bond, all the things, right? Like, it was just absolutely beautiful. I think that is for those folks who aren't familiar with like the 1990 version of it, right? Like, that is central to the story if you read the book, right? Like, this bond that these young kids and then subsequently adults form really helps them to like defeat this evil, right? And I think that there is, the success of Stranger Things sort of, I think, got newer audiences back into this mode of like good child actors, like, and really good sort of like child characters, just like kicking ass and taking names. And so I think for me, that was one of the highlights. Rich and the rest of them kids, they was about it. They was about that life. They wanted all the smoke. Like, they were with it. They weren't with the shits. Like, legit, one of my most favorite moments of the series was when these children were walking around in the sewers after taking, 2 or 3 Valiums? Like, they was just turned all the way up in the sewer, just having a grand old time. I think another one for me with the kids was the whole sort of concept and conversation that Lily brought up. Are you an anchor or a lifeboat? And I think that, first of all, that was just beautifully stated. As a therapist, as a psychologist, I appreciate that metaphor, and I might steal it in my own sort of professional practice. And I think it served to, the way that it sort of reemerged in the series and served to strengthen the bond between the kiddos. I think it was just so beautifully done. So the kids, particularly my guy Rich Santos, like, absolutely amazing. I will also say, and again, unless you've been like living under a rock, you've probably seen sort of content about this on social media, but that intro music is stellar. Like, next level. Like, I don't know who found that creepy ass song. I don't know who gave the approval, sort of like signed, seal, delivered that creepy ass song, but that intro, not just the song, but like the sort of intro sequence, to me was like up there with like American Horror Story. Like, that's one of my favorite and I'm talking about like OG American Horror Story, like season 9 and earlier. Like even some of those are questionable, but the way American Horror Story does their sort of title sequences with the music, amazing. And I didn't think. Also, Game of Thrones, I think, had a good one. Anyways, I didn't think that anything could ever rival that, but this creepy, like, reminisce, I just can't. Like, it was just too much, and see, now it's stuck in my head, and it's going to be stuck in my head for the rest of the day. Intro song, absolutely amazing, chef's kiss. Also, Pennywise, because duh. Like, it was one of the first films, the OG It, the 1990 version, was one of the first films that I watched, like, when I was entirely too young, and is one of the reasons that I am a horror fan now. And so, like, in my heart of hearts, I have a very special place for Pennywise. And I remember when I learned that they were going to remake the movie in 2017, I was like, whatever, dude. Because, like, Tim Curry, his performance as Pennywise is just so iconic. Tim Curry is just an iconic human being. And I was just like, I'm not ready for this. And I think that this series, more so than the two films that featured Bill Skarsgård in the role, like, this series cemented it for me. Like, he's dope. And I think the way his interpretation of Pennywise is amazing. And there were so many moments in the series. I mean, the way he came at Will, staying on top of the refrigerator, the fact that I think it was the last 2 episodes, he was just bloody, like, from the lips down. Like, I don't know. It was just amazing. And I think that it was just very well done. And much like the folks on IMDb, my favorite episode of this series is The Black Spot. I think, again, from start to finish, it was so well done. There was just every emotion. I felt like I was watching an episode of Supernatural. Y'all knew I was going to sneak Supernatural in here some kind of way. I felt like I was watching an episode of Supernatural because there was, like, everything. You felt everything in that episode. There was fear, like horror. There was intense emotion, sadness. There was, like, what the fuck moments. And there was, like, this bitch moment. There was just so much in that however long it was, hour-long episode. It was just, it was so well done. And as I mentioned, I really feel like there weren't many misses for me in the series. One of the absolute misses, and I will preface this by saying this is true for me for a lot of new horror, like modern horror, but the CGI is some of it was just horrible. Like, I remember, I think the first episode was kind of okay, but the first moment I saw that, like, mutant baby on the screen, I was like, what are we doing right now? That was one of the issues I actually have with the 2 It films, like Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Y'all know the initial scene of It is iconic when Georgie meets Pennywise in the sewer. And I remember sitting in the theater with my husband watching that movie, and when the CGI came, when Pennywise bit off Georgie's arm, like, I remember he turned to me, he looked at me, and he was like, really? And I'm like, yeah, I don't even know. Like, this CGI I don't know. Like, and I can appreciate, like, the creepiness of it. Like, it is absolutely creepy. Like, the scene in episode 2 with Lily and the pickle jars and her dad, that was gross, and it just creeped me out on so many different levels. And it's, like, almost to the point that it's comical. And so it's like, I'm not scared anymore. Like, now I'm just laughing. I will say, though, to sort of silver line that, the CGI of Pennywise with, like, all the teeth, particularly in this series where we saw him sort of, like, frozen. I need to stop calling Pennywise a him. We don't know if that's his gender. Let me stop doing that. When we saw Pennywise frozen, like, in place because of, like, the magic dagger or whatever, I feel like I hated the CGI a little bit less in those moments. And then you have episodes like episode 3 when they're in the graveyard and it's like they're being chased by, like, the green slime ghost from Ghostbusters, or like Casper from, like, that 1995 movie. Like, whatever, it was a hot mess. And so I don't know, and I don't know what else you would do differently. That's why I don't work in Hollywood. Like, I don't know what else you would do. I just know that wasn't it for me. Like, the CGI, it was just, and I don't know if it was the type of things they were doing, but it was not my favorite. I very much appreciate more of the, like, classic horror elements, like with the tension, darkness, shadows, whatever. And some of that stuff was just too much for me. The other thing I'll say that I didn't particularly care for, and this is just a pet peeve of mine, people just be walking around in the sewers like they're not sewers. Like, do you know what's in the sewer? Like, pee-pee and poo-poo. As I would say to my daughters, you got pee-pees or poo-poos? Like, that's what's in the sewer. and ill. Like, I feel like people just be walking around, people just be in the sewer water, and I'm like, does anybody get like staph infections? Like, what are we doing right now? And so and again, what else would you do? That's obviously a very integral part of the story. And I remember, I think it was chapter 1, yeah, when Eddie Kasprak, rest in peace, when he mentioned something about being in the sewers and what is gray water, and I was like, yes, that was so realistic. Everybody still just walked in there, but gross, totally gross. And so 3 different things I want to talk about as it relates to why I felt like this show was so amazing. And the first being that I feel like this series sort of modernized the narrative in a way that I think was necessary to sort of maintain this new generation of fans, right? So Stephen King has been around since the beginning of time, right? And that's no shade. Like, that's no shade. I think I've said this before on the show, one of my mom's most favorite series in the whole wide world is The Dark Tower by Stephen King. I finally read it, I don't know, 4 years ago, because I didn't want her to disown me because I never read it, because it's a lot. Stephen King's writing is a lot. It's very dense. And it's, there's a reason that he's been so successful over time. And so, because again, I think the book came out in the 80s, the late 80s, mid to late 80s. That sort of narrative in itself and sort of the way it was written, if we were to stay very true to it, I think wouldn't be as palatable for this new generation of horror fans. And so I think there was a modernization of the narrative that I think really, really worked. I think we also got answers to a lot of the questions maybe we didn't even know we had. Questions that I think of as the "but why though" questions. And for me, those are, where did Pennywise come from? Why does Pennywise appear as a clown? Why is Pennywise only in Derry? Like, questions that, in previous iterations of the content, sort of, if you think about the book, I mean, y'all, the book is thick as the Bible. So I'm sure all those answers are in the book. I've read it once and never again, because it's very, if you've ever seen it, it's like a gajillion pages long. And as I mentioned, Stephen King's writing is just it's a little much for me. It's great. It's just it's a lot. We're spending 52 pages talking about what color the sky is, which is beautiful. It gives you he's very descriptive, and sometimes I just don't be having time for that. When you get into the story though, you're like, yeah, this is tight. And because he spent all this time sort of building everything up, you're really immersed in it. It's just, sometimes I ain't got time for all that. Anyways, I think some of those questions are absolutely answered in the book. I also think that the sort of creative liberties that the show took allowed for there to be an expansion of some of those base ideas in the book. And so, for example, some of the things that were portrayed in the series that are absolutely book accurate or sort of accurate adaptations from the source material would be the 27-year cycles, right? They talk the 27-year cycles makes me think about Jeepers Creepers. Every 23 years for 23 days it gets to eat. Except for Pennywise, it's 27 years. So anyways, but those 27-year cycles, the same as the book and the films and all of that. I think what was also sort of kept the same-ish, the characters and their families, right? So many familiar names. I think that was one of the geekishly exciting aspects of the series for me, is when somebody would say something and I'd be like, oh, I know that name, or I know that person. I think another thing that was sort of central to the story, which has been sort of common throughout all of the different adaptations, it feeds on fear, and it is a creature from another world. And so that was kind of the base that I think this show really did well to build upon. This show also, I think, which is super dope, integrated other aspects from what we'll call the Stephen King universe, but particularly sort of the Dark Tower universe. I mentioned to y'all how much my mama loved the Dark Tower. All roads lead to the tower. And so for there to be so many different elements pulled in, I think that was super dope. One, I think that was pretty glaring. Dick Hallorann, who is, I think he's definitely in The Shining. I've never seen Dr. Sleep or read that book. I'm sure he's in that too. But Dick Halloran, with his sort of psychic powers and what have you, I'm sure there's like a much more extensive explanation of what he can do. Do I know it? Absolutely not. He was also one of my favorite characters because he too was about that life. More to come on that. So Dick Halloran was, I think, a sort of nice through thread for people who are familiar with the book and other works by Stephen King. The cosmic nature of Pennywise is very much tied into the entire sort of cosmic nature of the Dark Tower. And also the turtle. So that was one of the things for me that I don't know why, but it's something that I very much remember from reading Stephen King. The turtle holds the world on its back or something. The turtle of enormous girth on his back, he holds the earth. Something like that, like some sort of rhyme that I remember from Stephen King. But anytime there's turtle imagery in any Stephen King sort of on-screen adaptation, I'm like, I know that. And so, dope. Another thing I'll say, just totally random, but I had like sort of like a horror node moment in the season finale when Pennywise called all of those people into the gym. He absolutely pulled a Carrie and like locked them in there while he was about to mess them up. Like, and I was like, dang, that was the first thing I thought of when he all them students were in the gym and they're looking around like, what's going on? And then he comes out and like rips the principal's head or whatever he did, right, to the principal. And then everybody's trying to get out and they run to the doors and they're trying to open the doors and they can't. I'm like, yo, that is straight out of Carrie, which is also a Stephen King adaptation. So super dope. And again, a lot of little Easter eggs that I think for myself and other, whether you be sort of Stephen King book nerds, horror nerds, whatever, like very well done. Thank you for giving us those moments, show creators. And thank you for the creative liberties that you all decided to take, because again, I think that is what made this show so amazing. It wasn't more of the same, like more of the recycled, like, okay, there were many sort of creative decisions made that I think only enhanced the story. One of those being, obviously the timeline is different, as I mentioned. I think in the original It story, like the present time for the Losers Club is like the late 80s, early 90s, mid to late 80s, meaning their sort of childhood time was in the 50s, whereas with this sort of timeline and this iteration of It, we saw from the films that modern times was like in the 2010s, I'm pretty sure, and their childhood time was the late 80s. And so this, being 27 years prior to that, was sort of set in 62. And so that was dope. I think the entirety of the military subplot, which I'll get into more in a few moments, but I think that was also a good, very realistic, in my opinion, very realistic addition to the story, as well as the way that they sort of more explicitly discussed Pennywise's origins, right? I think that, and it was a line in an article I read sort of in preparation for this, that the creators really thought of this as what we would call a, quote, hidden story from the book. So you could read between the lines of Stephen King's sort of original work and basically insert this part of the story. And many of the creative liberties that they took, they felt like it was like it's something that's sort of hidden, not necessarily explicitly stated, but absolutely plausible, which again, super dope. And so not only do I feel like this show really modernized the narrative and brought in these new fans that maybe have like zero concept of Pennywise before 2017. What I will also say, and this is sort of the second thing that I think was particularly salient for me, is Pennywise, I think, I don't want to say leveled up, because I don't want to make it sound like the Tim Curry Pennywise is not good. What I will say though is that this iteration and this generation of Pennywise, particularly in like the on-screen version, right? Like the book version, I think is something totally different because we can all interpret that and envision that in our own unique ways. The on-screen personification of Pennywise, I think this version, Bill Skarsgård's version, is more horror and less camp. And let me just say, I'm not saying camp is a bad thing. I am a fan of 80s slasher horror. I'm a fan of 80s horror, which is like 98% camp, okay? Like, I'm not saying having campy horror is at all bad. I'm not saying that in the slightest. I will say that this iteration of Pennywise is super sinister. I think he also, I need to stop calling him a he. We don't know, like, the understandings of gender, I feel like are just like, I am imposing like our societal understandings of gender on Pennywise, and I need to stop doing that. Pennywise, I think in this iteration, again, is just iconic for so many different reasons than Tim Curry's Pennywise, right? Like, one thing that I very much remember about the Tim Curry Pennywise in the 1990 version is he was like funny. Like, I can't, sir, like, I can't take, again, I did it again. Like, I can't take you seriously. Like, what are we doing? Like, it's scary, yes. And I think part of that also is attributed to like 1990s effects and sort of what could you do, right? Like, how could you make him scary in a made for TV film? And so I very much appreciate this very gritty version, and I think that is in large part due to, again, Bill Skarsgård's portrayal. I think another thing that is sort of like one of my favorite little random byproducts is that, like, the red balloon is like super iconic now. Like, it has become a pop culture icon all in itself. Like, I remember watching the series, and I think it's like the third episode when we see like the red balloon, and I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I was just so excited, right? I mean, to this day, like, if I see anybody with a red balloon outside, like, I'm going the other way. Thanks. I don't want those problems. And so, and I think that sort of iconicness of that symbol. I also, and I sort of referenced this a few moments ago, I think the way that Pennywise looks is just unsettling. Like, it's giving like Heath Ledger Joker. It's just giving a lot. And I think the entirety of the scene that we saw with Pennywise's backstory, and this is why a clown, and this is why it's this particular clown, which, can I just say, random, like, sort of deterrent, right? Like, random side story. This is, y'all know by now, this is what I do. Like, I start a sentence, I don't know where it's going. Like, we about to have 10 side stories. One of I think the creepiest scenes in the series was Ingrid's dad, whatever his name was, the person that Pennywise sort of stole his identity, right? When he is standing there smoking the cigarette, and then whatever form Pennywise was in, I think it was like a small child, sort of came and was very like cast in shadow, but the eyes were glowing. And I remember I was like, this is super creepy. And then what that sort of creature said was something like, the kids seem really drawn to you, and like that was all. And then he like gets real Pennywise, I guess, to follow him into the woods. It was so creepy. Like, I'm thinking about it now, and I'm like, damn, that was like next level, like, horror tension, right? And so I really feel like, again, that was like tense horror, which I think is very much parallels Stephen King's writing. Like, his writing is like horror, like chill to the bone horror type of things. And I think that before this show, the It movies didn't really do that for me. I think that this show, there was fear in a number of different ways, and that was one of them, right? Like, the tension, again, very sinister edge. I will also say sort of like the opening sequence of the series. So, like, I mean, episode 1, scene 1, like with Maddie in the car with what he thought was a family. Random side note. So I watched that episode actually 3 times, because I attempted to start watching the show like 3 times. So the first time I watched it, I was either like about to give birth or I just gave birth. And so to think about like just everything about that initial scene and how intense and graphic, and I feel like very anatomically sort of like correct it was just the most, right? And sort of the most recent time I watched the first episode in that opening scene, I was a little bit more removed from like pregnancy and childbirth, and so it just hit different. Like, it just hit different. And so I think that is and the fact that episode 2 sort of with Ronnie and her first encounter with Pennywise and the birthing scene, and like there was just a lot, and it was so much. And I think that for me, again, that was sort of like horror in a different way, It was just, it was a lot. I will also say from the pilot episode, that last scene in the theater, whew, beginning with sort of Maddie being inside the movie, which again to me was like next level tension, creepy. That is like some weird random fear that I have, that like I'm watching the TV, but the TV's watching me back, and the people on the TV are going to start interacting with me in some way, which again, if it's somebody who's fine, like, come on, let's do it. And that's also like super creepy. So sometimes when I watch Supernatural, I want them to like interact with me. Like, let's go hang out. Let's have a good time. Sam and Dane, Jared and Jensen. But that's not, whatever. That was very different than what we saw in that like theater scene, which, and you're like, with these kids through the whole episode, and you're like, this is gonna be like the losers club, and it's gonna be so great, and then damn, everybody did. Like, it was a lot. And I remember that was one of the things that really inspired me to get my shit together and watch the show, was how much chatter I was seeing on social media about how like Pennywise was just like fucking these kids up. Like no, he had no chill. The way he was like just demolishing these kids in a way that we hadn't seen in the earlier movies, right? Which I would wholeheartedly agree with. I think another thing that was sort of like close to home horror for me is, Juniper Hill and the very, very historically accurate portrayal of how people with mental health concerns were treated, particularly those who were institutionalized, right? Like, that was absolutely the way back then. And I think in some cases we have not come that far from the way that we dehumanize people who are in institutions, which that's a conversation for a different day. That's a soapbox I'll stand on in a different day. We have made many strides in the realm of mental health care, and even sort of the way we deal with people with severe and persistent mental illness. And I think that the way it was portrayed, again, the dehumanization, the dismissal, just a lot of it. And again, that's sort of the last scene of the final episode, returning to Juniper Hill in 1988, 89. And it was just so beautifully done. And again, to me, very historically accurate. And so all of that sort of, and the gritty, sinister, very tense nature of not only Pennywise, but the plot and everything that was going on, to me, again, is something that we have not seen in other adaptations of it and of Pennywise. One thing that is very familiar, though, to many folks, it was sprinkled in the 1990 film. It's very much evident in a lot of Stephen King's writings, and brings me to sort of like the final thing I want to talk about as it relates to the series, but that is just like racism and the sort of very, 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 the both covert and overt manifestations of racism. And if anybody who knows me and knows what I do as a person, as a professional, you knew that's where I was going, obviously. And again, I think what I appreciate about this show is that it wasn't like hinted at. It was very in your face. And some of it was, which I'll talk about, it was so unsettling because it was so familiar. Like it was a lot. So the sort of this idea that the Pennywise is a monster, yes, so is America, and so is the town of Derry. I remember in episode 2, one of those racist white people that was in the bar talking to the chief, I think he was like a councilman or something. He said, "This ain't America, this is Derry." And I was like, dang. There was another quote, it was in the second to last episode, it was Charlotte. She said to Leroy, her husband, "This town is the monster. Like, Derry is the monster." And I was just like, yo, because I think that what I appreciate about what this sort of parallel narrative did is that we have external fear. We have externalized fears. We have external battles that we're fighting. So when I say external, I mean external to human beings, right? So Pennywise is something that is like an external enemy versus racism, sexism, homophobia, any other type of ism. Those are like internal things that we need to deal with. Those are matters of hearts and minds, right? Pennywise and the shenanigans that Pennywise is engaged in are like external, like your fears externalized, manifesting as very tangible things, versus racism which is also tangible and is the result, again, of not only systemic injustice that very much manifests itself in healthcare, incarceration, all these different things. It is also these ingrained supremacist ideals, which we saw very, 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 very much so in It Welcome to Derry. And so for me, the racism and the manifestations of that and sort of feeling the fear of the characters living that was far more scary and unsettling than this like cosmic creature that is like literally eating people, right? Like this cosmic creature that is in the middle of this fire just like chomping on someone, right? Like, yes, that was super scary. Yes, this young child seeing their deceased father in a pickle jar. Yes, this young child seeing their deceased mother like as a bed birthing them. Like, all of that was super upsetting, super disturbing. And it didn't hit for me as intensely as the racism that, again, felt familiar, very real, and all too present. And I want to sort of underscore real, right? So, and when I say for me, I mean me as someone who is engaging with this sort of piece of art, right? Like this piece of creative content. I know that Pennywise is not real, right? Like I understand Pennywise, if you are real and you heard that, please don't come for me. Like, I love you and I respect you. I know that Pennywise is not real. I know that Jason Voorhees is not real. I know that these fictional characters, Freddy Krueger, like Leatherface, whoever we're talking about, right? Like, those things aren't real to me. Like, I've never encountered that in my life. Whereas racism is very real, very insidious, very sinister, and exists everywhere we look, right? And so to me, and that's what I feel like when you think about, Jordan Peele's movies or other sort of black horror films that really make that apparent, that racism is the monster. Like racism is the horror, like racism is the thing to be feared. I think that this show so beautifully blended those two things. Very reminiscent to me of Lovecraft Country. Blended these two, like this supernatural element with this element of like, damn. And so a couple instances in the series that I'll sort of point to that I feel like made this really, really real for me. And that was the first being in episode 4, Hank is talking to Charlotte. Like Charlotte has come to see Hank after he's been arrested for some shit he didn't do. But he wouldn't tell nobody where he was at. Come to find out he was with his mistress, who is a white woman who is married, right? And there's a scene where Charlotte is sitting across from Hank in the police station, and he discloses to her that he has this entanglement with a married white woman. And the immediate sort of that you see Charlotte sort of have, it was just ooh. Like thinking about it right now, I'm just like, yo, kudos to the writers, kudos to the actors. But she sort of like whispered it. They're in this police station, no one to be seen, right? But she whispers like, a white woman, because they both understand, even in 1962, right? Which for them, they were probably like progressive. It was like not cool, right? Like it's not like people will have issue with that. People will have issue with a black man and a white woman. People, I think, in 2025 still have issues with that. And again, to each their own. I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't think, what you should or shouldn't believe. I am here to speak my truth, which is that I'm a whole black woman married to a white man. And so I think that scene, right? Like, yes. Episode 6, Ronnie is sort of, I think it's one of these instances where the kids had just had an argument or whatever, and they're sort of going their separate ways. And I don't remember who Ronnie was talking to. It might have been Will. It might have been Marge. Unsure. Side note, can we just shout out Marge and her character arc? Amazing. Anyways, but Ronnie is sort of exasperated, and she says, I'm just tired. Like, I'm tired of being scared. And that just, when I tell you that hit me in my soul, one, to see a young black child, a young black female child, right? Like a young black girl, to say, I'm just tired. Hoo-wee. Thinking about the strong black woman archetype, and it's like you don't want that for kids, and I think it was. My hope is that it was a very intentional choice on the creator's part to have Ronnie be the one who delivered that line. Nonetheless, it was just, it was both like, it was like bittersweet. It was like very like affirming and validating when she said that, and then you think about the fact that like, one, this is a fictional character, and two, this is like a child. You're like, damn. Two other things that I'll just sort of point to that I feel like were clutch my pearls, like this is getting really real. Instances in the series, the whole lynch mob, like the mob mentality, the lynch mob, and I knew what was gonna happen at the Black Spot, right? Like that's part of the book that was alluded to in the other film, so like you know what's gonna happen, and I still wasn't prepared, not only for sort of like the rampant violence, not only for what happened to my guy Rich, but just the way that we sort of got this insight and this sort of glimpse into the mob mentality, and again sort of like the racism and all that. It was just horrible. And then there was a point in the last episode, which this is totally random, like aside, Pennywise is talking to, I think it's Leroy on the phone, like after he takes Will into the deadlights or whatever. And he said, dark meat tastes twice as sweet. And I was like, wow, Pennywise, like, really? Really, my guy? Like, that's what we're doing? And I think what I think is interesting for me in pointing out sort of that comment, I heard it in a different way, right? That I'm sure people who are not black or people who don't like thinking about race and racism and dynamics of race and racism, that's like part of my job. It's not just my lived experience, like it's part of the work that I do. So when I watch something or when I listen for something, it's like part of the lens with which I'm interpreting that which I engage with, right? And so when Pennywise said that, I was like, really? It reminds me of that Freddy Krueger said something very similar in Freddy vs. Jason to Kelly Rowland's character. And it's like, in the moment, you're like, ha ha ha. And then it's like, whoa, that's racist, bro. Like, that's not cool. So again, those are just a few of the many instances I feel like in the series where sort of for me, again, as a black woman watching this series, were scary because of the familiarity, because of the realism, because of the very, 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 what I feel like you could have taken everything that I just said and put that into 2020 in the 2025 context, and it would still make sense, which again is sad and just also very scary. The other thing that I think is noteworthy for me, and then in going to the finale, right? There's a scene in the finale, spoiler alert, where everybody's out on the frozen lake and the military is moving in because they are trying to capture Leroy. I don't even remember what they was doing. They was doing something janky. The military is coming in and they're surrounding like all these different characters of color. So you have the Hanlons and you have the indigenous folks, and there's a point where, and I remember just like screaming. I was internally screaming because one of my children was like sleeping next to me, but I internally screamed when the people of color unite and sort of flip the script on these military folks, and they take their guns and they're like, hold up, we're not doing that today. After one of the indigenous folks who was murdered, that's a story for a different day. But I think that was that sort of unity and that depiction of sort of like marginalized people banding together to sort of fight against this great supremacist power. Like, I'm here for it. I think even in the way the story was told about how the indigenous folks, they said it, I think, quote, lived in balance with Pennywise, right? Like lived in balance with this monster for all these years. And then here come the military. Like, oh, there's something that's like very powerful. Like, let's take it and control it and use it for our gain. Like, which also was just so accurate. Like, so very well done. Kudos to the writers. But the very real, very frightening nature of the U.S. military trying to control this great power that has the capacity to destroy. What does Pennywise always say? I'm the eater of worlds. Like, I'm the destroyer of worlds, whatever. You have this world-altering, world-destroying power, and what you want to do, use it to, like, fuck everybody else up. Like, what are we doing right now? Also, such like an American military thing to do, and that's not a shade. Don't come for me like I'm not. Don't come for me like I'm anti-military or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. What I am anti is power hoarding. Okay, and that's exactly what was happening. And so there's a scene in episode 5 where General Shaw is actually talking to Rose and is going on this whole diatribe about what he needs to do to, quote, keep this country safe. The irony of a white military general telling an indigenous woman, I have to keep this country safe, when it was white militarized folks that really just stole the country from the indigenous people. Like, what are we doing right now, General Shaw? I remember like legit rolling my eyes at that scene. So ridiculous. And the last thing I'll say about sort of dynamics of race that I feel like the series did really well is inherent in the different stages of Black identity that we see present in many of the Black characters, right? And so this to me was like, again, I very much hope that there was an intentionality here. And if not, that's why I'm recording this episode. So if this is something that people were unfamiliar with or whatever, like maybe we can increase our knowledge around this, right? And so I'm going to start with Halloran. There was a scene in episode 6 where he is just like, first of all, he was turned up. Like the whole series, Halloran is just like, he has power because literally psychic powers. Those psychic powers give him more symbolic power within the military, right? Like they are utilizing him for their nefarious gains, right? And that gives him more power in that military structure than we see his sort of like other Black compatriots, right? What I will say is that I feel like Dick Halloran throughout the series, we see him utilizing that power in some instances to help others and to help other marginalized folks, right? Which I think is fabulous. And what I also thought was fabulous was in episode 6 where he's like going off on Leroy for something or other, and he calls him a bootlicker. He called Leroy. Oh, it was so funny because I was like, he is not lying, which is a tremendous segue to talking about Leroy's character, who we see at various points throughout the series is telling Charlotte, his wife, like, don't be, and I think he says like very explicitly, don't stir the pot. Like, don't come up here acting a fool, right? Because Leroy has aspirations for moving up in the military structure. And we hear Halloran say to Charlotte, like, to move up in the military, your personal life got to be cleaner than your uniform as a Black person, right? Like, that's the part that goes unspoken. For a Black man to rise at the military ranks, he has to be like one of the good ones, right? No sort of bad behavior of any kind. And Leroy sees his wife's activism as bad, which is just so many side eyes, right? And so he would be in what Dr. William Cross, in his model of Black racial identity, he would call the conformity or pre-encounter stage, where he essentially is trying to conform to the sort of pre-existing structures in society, which is basically like sort of white racial norms, right? And we see that. To me, the military very much has standards and principles that are sort of rooted in ideas of whiteness and capitalism, all these different things, right? Which again, don't nobody come for me. Like, that's not necessarily a shade. It is an observation and is also an invitation to think about how that might influence people who are not white and their experiences in the military. But what we also see with Leroy is his experience of what we would call a dissonance event, which is when people who, particularly people of color, and in this instance we're talking specifically about Black people, there are Black people in this sort of conformity or pre-encounter stage that believe they're just like everyone else. Like I'm given the same opportunities as my white counterparts, right? Like I have just as much opportunity as they do, right? Like racism doesn't affect me. Spoiler alert, it does. And the sort of transition from thinking that racism doesn't affect you to really like, perking up and saying like, wait, what? Is usually the result of what we call a dissonance event. And for Leroy, it was when the military lied and said, oh, we're going to take this like magic dagger pillar thing and we're going to trap Pennywise further, when actually they wanted to do the complete opposite, right? Like they wanted to let Pennywise free which really was super jacked up. They wanted to like keep people in line by keeping them afraid. Like, what are we doing right now? But for Leroy, that was when finally, why did it take you that long to realize this? But whatever, it's fine. It's fine. Your wife been trying to tell you this, but whatever, it's fine. We don't listen to and value black women. It's fine. Whatever. I'm not upset or anything. But that was his dissonance event. Seeing the military, he was ready to throw it all away. He was ready to send General Shaw to glory because of this situation, right? And I think that for Leroy, that pushed him into the next stage of black racial identity development, which we would call the encounter stage. Speaking of Charlotte, I think she is in what Dr. Cross would call the internalization commitment stage, which is ostensibly when black people understand racism exists and they work actively against it, not just for themselves, but for the well-being of all black folks, right? And we see that in much of Charlotte's behavior throughout the series, right? Like she didn't know hang from a hole in the wall, but when she found out that this black man was being railroaded and set up for this crime he didn't commit, she was ready to go to battle for him, essentially. She was ready to help him in any way that she could. And I think that we see this juxtaposition between Charlotte and Leroy throughout the series in a very well done way. She says to him in episode 4, there's going to be trouble anywhere we go. That's the country you swore your life to protect. Which, the shade. Oh my gosh, I'm here for it. The fact that she was calling him in to, you literally devoted your entire existence to protect a country that doesn't value us, that sees us as trouble, that is not here for us, right? And I was like, come on, queen. And so I think that for Charlotte and Leroy in particular, we sort of see a combination of those ways of thinking within Will, right? Like he is, like most adolescents, trying to find his way, really developing his own sense of identity. And I think we see a little bit of each of his parents, right? Like I think we see a little bit of the conformist rule follower in Will that is very much like his dad. I think we also see a bit of the rebellious, like Nuck if you buck, which is very much his mom. And so I think that, again, that was just very beautifully done. And with that, I will close this conversation by saying clearly, if you cannot already tell, like I'm super geeked about this. I think that this show is amazing. I'm actually excited to watch it again in its entirety. It was just so beautifully done. And I want to end this, as I always do, with a compliment sandwich. So really describing things that I appreciated about the series, just naming some of those things. And I prefaced this a bit ago, but Marge and her redemption arc, amazing, right? Like Marge was trash the whole like first 3 episodes of the show. Like she was a trash friend. She was just like, whatever. I'm like, this girl I hope she gets murdered next. And then like she had this whole redemption arc that I feel like also called me in to be like, damn, why was I so mad at that little girl? So Marge's redemption arc, absolutely amazing. I think that I was secretly and not so secretly pleased that the military and the powers that be sort of got their comeuppance in this series. Like we already sort of talked about that last scene, the scene where Pennywise kills General Shaw, because I don't know what he thought. I don't know what he must have been outside his mind when he was in front of Pennywise on that ice, basically telling Pennywise, like, you gonna listen to me, fam? And Pennywise is like, no, like, what are you talking about? And so I think that the symbolic nature of that, y'all knew what y'all was doing. Them creators knew what they was doing. And so that was something that I particularly appreciated. And the fact that this wasn't like a Great White Hope situation. Like for me, one thing about the like original, the sort of 1990 version, and I think even in the story a little bit, right? Like Bill Denbrough is like the leader of the Losers Club, and he's sort of like the Great White Hope in many of these situations, right? Like he's the person that has the answers. He's the hero. And I think in this instance, in this series, in this story, particularly again, sort of like in the last battle on the ice, we see it was actually my dude Rich, and even Daniel, who sort of like gave his life to help defeat, I put that in quotes, great evil, right? I think that I applaud the creators for that choice. I think there could have been a creative direction that had Lily or Marge being sort of like the people who were the saviors, and they chose not to do that. And I think that was awesome. I prefaced this before, and I'll just say it again because it's worth repeating. One of my least favorite things about this series, the CGI. Point blank, period. That's it. That's the post. The CGI was horrible. I'll end this by saying I will reiterate that I feel like this was a much needed updating of Pennywise as a character. And I believe the way that it has been cemented in horror culture and in sort of this newer iteration is... this is going to sound like way grandiose, but I'm just happy that what a time to be alive, right? Like what a time to be alive when we're seeing this evolution of Stephen King's narrative to Tim Curry to now Bill Skarsgård, and the entirety of what this 2-film series and now this TV show has done for, again, Pennywise as a horror icon, the red balloon as a horror icon. Like I, as a horror fan, as a millennial, couldn't be more pleased. And with that, good people, I appreciate you as always. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your engagement. Hit me up on social at Dr. Vanessa _hints if you have any thoughts about anything that I said. Until next time, I wish you and your families safety, health, and joy. Be well, beautiful people.